So good morning, everybody. My name's Lesley. This is MK. We are going to be doing a little bit of a mix of chatting and using some of our slides. So we have some notes for ourselves of some things that we wanted to make sure to say. And we also have some content in our presentation from a gentleman called John Daly. So John isn't here today. John is a man who is living with what he calls speech loss, so he's no longer a verbal communicator because of his M&D diagnosis. He has given us some content that we'll be showing in our presentation as well. What we are focusing on is the experience of people who have a speech difficulty as part of their medical condition. So by that we mean that it's not that someone has any difficulty thinking of the actual words that they want to say, but there's been an impact on the muscles that they use for speech so that the sounds of the words don't come out so clearly. So I'll introduce myself and then hand over to MK to introduce himself. So I'm a speech and language therapist. I have worked in Beaumont Hospital for over 15 years in the neurology area. So that would include working with people who have a lot of the conditions that Nicole referred to. I'm currently in TCD. I was going to say I've just started a PhD, but I'm now into year 2, so not quite just started. It's part of what's called a Miranda program. One of my colleagues, Avril, is over there in the corner as well. So Miranda is for healthcare professionals who work with people who have M&D, and the program is looking at how can we use technology to track symptoms for people so that maybe we can monitor them in their own home, they don't have to come to hospitals so frequently, and also can see some of their own health information as well through that. So I'll hand over to MK. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Mike Clancy, but I'm better known in rugby circles and in the M&D community as MK. By the way, for those that don't wish to be bored for the next 3/4 of an hour, you can leave now. Where you won't take offense. Originally, when I wasn't diagnosed but knew there was some issues, I started losing power in my hands and weakness in my joints, in my legs. I had a blinds company, so I needed to climb and steps of stairs and ladders to measure stuff. I was finding it more dangerous as time went on. I also had a difficulty with my speech. So.
And what did you notice about your speech?
When I would speak to somebody, I would be asked to repeat. So I adapted my own system. I reverted back to my amateur dramatics days where I slowed down my rate of speech to try and make myself plain and heard.
And would you be happy to tell people or comfortable to tell people what your medical diagnosis is?
I was diagnosed in 2016 with M&D, but I'm actually one of the lucky ones. My diagnosis is PLS, which means, and I did ask the prof this usual question, when you get a serious diagnosis, how long? And I was told I would have a normal life expectancy, but my body would deteriorate over time. So
I suppose just to say, motor neuron disease has a few different subtypes. So the most common type is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS.
Yes.
So what MK has is primary lateral sclerosis. So it affects the body in a similar way, but at a slower rate.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a rarer form of M&D.
I'm special. Um, PLS patients in the MND community amount to between 4 and 7% of all of the people. So, like I said, I'm special.
And MK, will you tell us a little bit more about some of the experiences that you had with your speech, of any scenarios where people maybe pointed it out or had difficulty understanding you that come to mind?
Yeah, I remember I went to Shannon one day, Shannon in County Clare, to measure up, and there was 2 floors, upstairs and downstairs. But as I approached the stairway, I got a serious shock because each step was a half the width. So if you started wrong, you were goosed. Plus, coming down, I had a half width to actually land on. And as the balance was, we say, suspect, I hung on for dear life.
So kind of physically, those
Yes,
kind of things were barriers
it,
in a way for you, yeah.
it scared me.
Yeah.
Um,
And you were saying about sometimes in shops, maybe a shop assistant
yes,
might not quite work with you so well.
I find that lately, and I find it prevalent in younger attendants, as in older teens or young 20s. Um, they may ask a question, but they're looking down or looking at the till and looking away from me, and I'm over to their right. I answer, and they don't understand or hear me clearly enough. Will ask the question again, but not look at me. Where the perception to me is they're not concentrating on what I'm answering, and they seem to me distracted or more inclined to get the sale through, whereas it's not working for me. I find at times I have to raise my voice to try and get the message through. I also had an incident where I was asked to be the announcer in Thomond Park for an inter-pro game. And a friend of mine met me afterwards. I merely had to give the score and call out whoever scored the try or the penalty. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. And I met a friend of mine afterwards, and he said to me, "You sounded like Ann Doyle giving out the news." And that actually affected me internally.
No offense to Ann Doyle. Very good
No
newsreader.
offense to Ann
Just
Doyle.
sound like you.
It's just, I didn't sound over the PS system like he would normally have expected. Also, I rang a client back to get directions to her house, and I arrived maybe half an hour later, and she opened the door and looked at me and said, "I expected someone around 90 when I heard you on the phone."
I don't think that's something that, any of us would want to have verbalized to us.
Yes.
Will you tell us a little bit about any research that you have been involved in with your PLS or MND diagnosis?
I was involved with Owen some years back. Owen Finnegan.
He was doing MRI studies.
Yes.
Yep, yeah.
In St. James's, and I was also involved with Dee Murray some years back in Limerick in something like this, a discussion group, but confined to M&D patients.
Okay, so
You
was that a
know.
focus group scenario with people
Yes,
giving
yes.
opinions? Yeah, yeah.
By the way, the research with own proved one thing to my family anyway, that I do actually have a brain.
And thinking about PPI and the principle of people who are living with a medical diagnosis being involved in the design of studies about that medical condition, do you think that's something important, something that we should be striving for?
Um, in the word, yes. To me, it's a no-brainer. If you're asking the question, you need to ask the right question. Otherwise, the answer you get may not be relevant to the end product. A simple example: my late wife, Dr. Merson, if you had asked her what kind of a car she drives, it's white. What relevance is that to what type of make? You know, if you don't ask the right question or the specific, you get an irrelevant answer.
So PPI isn't just about ticking a box to say we're asking people, you have to really think about
Yeah.
what is it you want to know. Yeah.
Yes.
You had a lovely example about an architect as well in designing a building.
Yeah. This company would have been asked to design a medical building, a hospital or medical facility, and the individual architect was seriously into aesthetics. He wanted it to look fabulous, but simple thing. In the doors, he designed or thought a knob. In other words, a round knob was ideal for this type of building. Somebody like me, I have very poor grip, so the invitation I would get to attend room 10 in this building, I can't get into the room. If it was a handle, I had a chance. Or another simple one, I get the handle and I open the door, but there's a door saddle. It's a trip hazard to me. Most people are, I would consider, able-bodied people, don't even think about these things, but they're relevant to the end user of this. So if I'm not involved or somebody like me is not involved, they won't be able to raise the relevant point.
So if you are an architect designing a building and you don't consult the people who are going to be using that building, you're not going to end up with the best end outcome.
Yes.
And if we use that analogy for PPI, if we don't consult the people whose lives are going to be impacted by this research when we're designing that research, we might end up with the best outcomes for it either.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And are there any benefits you can think of researchers and people who are living with the condition being researched working together?
Again, I use the expression, it's a no-brainer, because find the doctors and the nurses and all of the medical end of things are quite capable and used to operating in extreme circumstances sometimes, but as patients, and I use the expression end users, we also have to be considered,
Yeah.
you know.
And you were telling me before about your experience in the Defence Forces and their use or lack of use of people's skills.
Yes, for my sins, I spent almost 42 years as a reservist. So, early on in my time, we used to attend annual training where we go to a camp or a barracks that wasn't used regularly but needed upgrading. No, within the reserve, there was all of the trades and professions you could ever need. Like there was electricians, carpenters, plumbers, and they would all be needed to upgrade a camp or a rundown barracks. But bureaucracy within the defense forces stated that has to be done by the engineer corps. Nobody else is qualified, even though I'm an electrician in Civil Street. It doesn't translate into the reserve or in the defense forces. So for me, for years, a resource within the reserve was wasted or, dare I say, not used. You know.
So if we think of when we're putting together PPI panels and the people who are coming and joining those panels, they're bringing all their Civvy Street skills to those panels. They might have lots of experience in lots of different things that we can really utilize and
Yes.
capitalize on. Okay.
And not just as if I join a group as a patient.
Yeah.
I'm a patient now, but have had 60 plus years of life experience as well, which can't be bought
We could say
cheaply.
you're a person, not just a patient.
Yes, yes.
I'm going to give MK a little bit of a break from talking, and I have a few slides that I want to read some bits of. So I think I might just go to the laptop in case the gremlins. Just so this isn't a very vague concept for people who are less familiar, we sometimes use the term AAC when we're talking about communication aids. So what that stands for is augmentative and alternative communication. And October happens to be AAC Awareness Month. So just in case anyone's not already aware of the type of things people might use. So sometimes people, if their speech is quite difficult to understand, they might use something very simple like handwriting to write down a word for clarification, or if their speech becomes very hard to understand, they might back up their communication using something like this. There's also alphabet charts. Maybe someone might just point to the first letter, or they can spell out a message. The one in the bottom right corner is a partner-assisted chart. So if you're somebody who can't physically point, their communication partner can call out the colours of the rows and help them scan through. And then sometimes people will use an electronic device, so some very simple things like a voice amplifier. If a person has very low volume as their main issue, a little personal voice amplifier like this, you can wear a microphone and they have a speaker, so they don't have to put so much effort in and can raise their volume that way. There's some apps that you can download for a smartphone or tablet, some very simple free ones, and then some more complex ones that are designed by communication companies. And then what we call dedicated communication devices. The top one here is a light writer, another model similar to the one that Mary was showing us. So as she said, that's good for people who maybe touch screen doesn't work so well. Maybe if they have a slight tremor, they can get some feedback from a button. And then the bottom one is another type of tablet. It's just a more slightly robust tablet than an iPad. So people can operate these in different ways. The starting point is always with their hands, but if their hand becomes, their fingers aren't moving so well, they could maybe simply hold a stylus pen and use the touchscreen that way. If a person can't scan across a device, but they have a power chair, they can sync their joystick for the chair by Bluetooth. There's also switch buttons, the gentleman over on the right. It's just a button that you can press with any part of your hand, your head, or your knee, or your hand, your foot, whatever is the most reliable method. The top gentleman, he's looking at the screen, and at the bottom there's a little eye gaze reader that picks up where he's focusing on the screen. So if he holds that gaze for a few seconds, he can make a letter selection. And the lady in the middle, if you look between her eyebrows, you can see a little silver dot. So that's actually a head mouse sensor. So it works similar to the eye gaze, but it's the sensor that's picking up where she's looking. So as researchers, you wouldn't ever be providing equipment like this for somebody. They come with this equipment. Equipment like that is provided by the Aids and Appliances Division of the HSC, but just important to know that people use very different or a range of methods for communication. So just looking in the media, there's a couple of other examples that I pulled out of opinions from people with speech loss or speech difficulty. Hopefully this clip will play without the gremlins. This is Father Tony Coote, who some people might have heard of. He was diagnosed with MND a few years back, and he led a campaign called Walk While You Can. And during that fundraising campaign, he travelled from Donegal down to Cork, and RTE made a documentary about his journey, and this is just a very brief promo clip from that.
One of the things I will face, that people face, is I lose my voice, and your voice is so much connected to your identity. I think psychologically that will be a mind bend beyond what I could comprehend, to be able to hear my own voice. And then I imagine you become less relevant, and that's why time is of the essence. I know that, and that's why I'm using my voice for this. When I can, I will.
Oh, sorry.
One of the things.
Right there. The words that stood out to me in that are less relevant. So Father Tony led a campaign that raised €750,000 for MND services. So to think that just because his medical condition impacted on his ability to communicate verbally, that we would consider him less relevant. You know, I wouldn't say that sits well with any of us, but if we aren't making efforts to include people with a speech loss or speech difficulty in our PPI, then we are perpetuating that. We are making them less relevant if we don't hear their opinions. This lady, Jo Harris, she's a barrister and judge from the UK, and she lost her speech, and when she wrote this piece was using an iPad for communication. So she talks about her experience now, saying, "So now I am silent when I've spent my life loving the sound of my own voice. I have also lost about 50 IQ points. Well, that may not literally be the case, but it feels that way because that's how I'm treated. My son asked me if I missed work, and I replied I missed the respect. Of course, it isn't true of everyone. Young shop assistants are great. The girl in Sports Direct who just treated me as normal." So slightly different to your experience, MK. But, you know, that aspect of the respect just because a person isn't a verbal communicator. She goes on to say, "I'm now, though, a non-person, a person with no point of view worth taking account of. I'm cut off by so many organisations because I can't ring them and they won't let me email. I've had a virtual stand-up fight with my the practice manager at my GP over the refusal to buy a mobile phone so I could text them. But why can't I communicate myself by email to tell them what I want and don't want? Why does it have to be done for me?" So again, I think just kind of taking account of that, if we can just modify slightly how we're gathering opinions from people and including them, you know, why can't she email? Why can't our PPI participants email or use different forms of communication? It's quite a simple solution. John then, so John is going to be coming up in the next few slides as well. This year he wrote a piece for the Irish Independent to help the IMNDA's fundraising campaign where they had a sponsored silence for fundraising. And he writes, he's talking about the experience of being within a conversation rather than necessarily being on his own, but not being able to participate so well. "What hurts the most is the loneliness of being on your own in a crowd, the misunderstanding with strangers who mix up speech loss with hearing or comprehension loss. There is also a loss of a retirement hobby, the fun and satisfaction of presenting a career development workshop to help young science teachers in the Irish Science Teachers Association." So I think for me that goes back to what MK was saying about using those skills from Civvy Street, that maybe John wouldn't feel so comfortable to get up and present, but he can certainly add some very worthwhile contributions to the presentation. And when John read the pieces from Jo on the previous slides, John is also now, he has what he refers to as speech loss, and he uses an iPad for communication. He completely identified with everything in those quotes from Jo. So while these are opinions from individuals, he felt a very similar experience about that assumption of, you know, your IQ isn't the same or that your opinion isn't so relevant. So John writes poetry, and he sent me this poem to read as his perspective of what it's like to be around in a social situation, I suppose, with speech loss. And he wrote this poem after a recent visit from his two sons, so I'll read this aloud to you. Behind them in my ghostly silence, I can see family chatting in a line, but without me. Under Paris Court's arching sentinels we walk, with the very essence of relationships, the talk. My signalling has developed system faults. In some key ways, I am locked within my vault. Long before it is my time to say goodbye, my best efforts just create a silent sigh. Though I feel their love in every single way and nothing is too much bother, it's okay. Deleted signals haunt my every turn as I seek to accommodate and learn. Enveloped in love's mist, my path is new, as each ability is stripped with none in lieu. I must turn my back on despair before the night, seek out such joy in little things that might give life its special meaning, and so not smother, even though I am not me, I am the other. And I think that's quite a powerful piece about not just the experience of not being able to join in, but also looking for a useful way to contribute, looking for something to do. So again, if we're not including somebody like John in our PPI, we're missing out on so much. Okay, we'll go.
I think that is special and deserves their round of applause.
Did you identify MK with any of those opinions on those slides?
Most actually.
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to being involved and
Yeah.
being part of the solution.
Yeah, that's a good
No.
way of putting it. Often when we think of PPI, we think of focus groups. So using that as an example, if you were to go to a focus group, would there be anything that you would want the organisers to consider? So for example, if it was a whole day event, would that be manageable for you, or would that be difficult with fatigue or your speech?
Normally, I don't say no. I'm
Okay.
a stupid volunteer, but an all-day event, I'm not sure I could get through it, or if I could, I'd actually pay for it. The rest of the week, I'd be knackered.
Okay. So as researchers, if we are kind of designing the structure of that, we need to consider that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and maybe just break up somebody like me, their continuous involvement all day.
Okay.
Maybe if I could maybe drop in and out of discussions or partaking of whatever,
Okay.
you know.
So to design your activities in a way that nobody is continuously talking, that there's gaps or maybe changing up the tasks or what's
Yes,
happening.
that I get downtime, as it were.
Yeah, I think we probably all want that over something for a day. And if you were, even if it wasn't an all-day event and you were doing a lot of talking, would you find your speech would feel a little bit more effortful towards the end of the day compared to the beginning?
Probably, you know, I mean, if you look at me, you haven't seen me walk and you haven't seen me talk. I actually am a good-looking guy. I don't look sick, is what I'm saying. I'm also very shy,
We picked up
but
on that.
willing.
And what would you, so if you were a researcher who hadn't done a lot of work, so take Mary's example, she was a bit nervous about interacting with that lady using the light writer because it was something unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Or if you're worried about what if I don't understand somebody, what if I embarrass myself for them? Is that a reason to exclude people with a speech difficulty or speech loss from a PPI panel?
Definitely not. The easiest way to gain knowledge or learn is to make mistakes. If you never make a mistake, you'll never learn.
It's life lessons with MK.
Yes.
Oh, I just. So again, as Mary said earlier, about being when you're communicating with somebody using a communication device, or if they have a speech difficulty, as a communication partner, communication is always two-way, and it looks slightly different for someone as a communication partner if the other person is using a device or has a speech difficulty. So MK and John have a couple of tips. Oh, okay. I'll read these out to you, MK, so we're not both turning backwards. So first one, make sure you face the speaker, are at the same level so you can make eye contact with them and see their mouth, and give the speaker your full attention. Is there anything you want to expand on in there?
Yeah, it sounds like common sense, but it's not so common. You know,
Yeah.
the idea of eye contact or face to face means a lot more to me, and I'm sure to John as well.
Yeah.
Rather than speaking to somebody's pole back in their head, it's easier to face them.
Nicole's example of having a sore throat and the effort, that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
That sometimes you say something and it's so much effort and the person goes, oh, what? Huh? They weren't half listening. Or recently our experience during COVID when everyone was wearing face masks. And even then when you had the perspex screens and you'd see people bending down with a little gap at the bottom of the perspex screen. So you had that sound barrier slightly muffled, but then also you couldn't see the person's face. So we can read so much by mouth movements and facial expressions.
And that would have brought it into, shall we say, real life for people that previously would have had no problem
Yeah.
hearing you or seeing you because somebody hadn't cleaned the screen this morning, or there was a book in front of the holes where the sound should come through. Small little things mean an awful lot to somebody that is, dare I say, challenged.
Well, next one we have, if the person is low volume, you can move physically closer to them so it's easier to hear. If you're doing an online consultation, if the other person's wearing a headset microphone, that microphone comes very close to their mouth and it will pick them up better. A lot of people have headset microphones, but maybe as a researcher, if we're asking someone to do online sessions, we could make sure that they have that equipment or provide it if it's necessary. Limit background noise. It's very effortful for a person who has some respiratory reason why they can't lift their volume to compete with background noise. If we're having something like a focus group and group settings, have smaller breakout discussions. So a person can talk in one-to-one with the person beside them or in a twos or threes. But again, being mindful then that if you've got multiple groups of twos and threes talking, your background noise is going to increase. So you might need to consider the room. Providing a microphone. Do you want to speak to that one, MK?
Yes, occasionally I would have been my club's president in rugby, and there is a pre-match meal before all Ireland League games. So the home president and the visiting president would be expected to speak for a few minutes at these. So make sure, I used to make sure that there was at the very minimum either a small room or a PA system. In other words, a microphone and a speaker, so that whatever I do say can be heard. I still consider myself relevant.
Good. And our last point in that one was make sure the area is well lit, and that's just going back to being able to see the speaker clearly. And then on our last row we have, in terms of just general conversation flow, watch for non-verbal signs that the other person has something to add. Try to avoid interrupting them while they're speaking. Maybe do you want to speak of those two, MK?
Yes, I find this very annoying when I listen to the radio and actually watch some TV talk shows. I find continually that the presenter is interrupting the speaker because he or she is not answering the right way for the presenter, so they want to cut them off. What they're saying may be relevant, but the presenter doesn't want it heard and interrupts in that sense.
And why is it more difficult or more challenging for someone who has a speech difficulty to be interrupted? Because as Irish people, I think once someone pauses for breath is when we cut in. We're back and forward all the time in conversation.
Yeah, again, a trick I used to use at the start of my speech, and this is known in the trade as dead radio. I actually wouldn't speak for a minute, maybe, before I actually talked, because people would kind of turn around or look at me and say, what's happening next, or why is he not talking? It's to get you focused on me.
So it's a bit easier. Interesting, I've seen in the Late Late Show some people praising Patrick Keelty for not interrupting as much as Ryan Tubridy used to do. It was one of his strong points.
Maybe he wasn't RTE trained.
There you go. And the last point we have on this slide is be honest if you're not understanding the person. Qualified with, well, maybe the person's saying a lot, repeat back what you did get and clarify that that's correct rather than to repeat everything. But if I was feeling a bit wary of saying to someone I didn't understand, if I feel a bit embarrassed that I haven't followed them, what's a respectful way for somebody to say, I'm sorry, I didn't get that? Because if you're giving your opinion, we'd asked you to come and give your opinion, we want to hear it.
I will actually turn it on me, as in, I'm sorry, I'm a bit thick and I didn't quite understand your answer. Maybe could you repeat it and say it slightly different?
Okay.
So we get the message, but turn it away from this person's inability to make themselves plain. Sorry, it was me. I didn't understand you. I'm the thick here.
Right, this is new for me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I might just flick through these because there's a couple more slides. So you could ask the person to repeat slower. State the topic if they're switching, so it's easier to tune in. If a person's speech is very difficult to understand, if they say one word at a time and you repeat that back, it helps to know where you went missing. Make sure they have time if they need to pause for breath. If they're straining, that they don't feel under pressure. Use other, clarify things with yes, no's. You can use gesture, and maybe have something like some writing materials are there. So John says, provided writing as possible, an LCD screen that refreshes instantly. This is an LCD writing tablet. So he says €10 in Lidl. I bought many of these in Lidl. They're great, but they're actually only even $7.99. So you write on it and you can press a button to clear it. He says it's a much more personal way on a one-to-one basis when both are present, and he's also used that on FaceTime with family, works well too. So for someone who's using a communication aid, they may have it mounted if they're using a power chair, but if it's something that they carry, provide a flat surface for it. Consider if you'll be able to hear the device. So John says, don't ask questions at a distance you won't hear the answer. If it's noisy, a Bluetooth rechargeable speaker placed on a table helps. So you wouldn't be expected to provide someone with the device, but maybe as researchers we could just make sure we have things like speakers. Establish how the person will signal if they want to come in on a conversation if it's moving on while they are typing. John says, not alone has the conversation moved on twice or more while you type, but it is common for the person to have even forgotten what the comment is referring to. So if we're facilitating a discussion, maybe we need two people. We need one person to be moving the discussion along and another person just watching out for those kind of signals. Ask the person about their preferences. So if someone's typing, do we read it as they're typing? If they're writing, do we wait till they get to the end? Do we guess what they're going to say? So John says it's a difficult choice, depends on the flexibility of the mind of the reader. It can be very off-putting for an over-the-shoulder person, Bill dispense, to reach and be definite about a conclusion which has nothing to do with what you were writing. I find this process has provided me with much more.
First world
I might go back to
problems.
the computer. I find this process has provided me with a much more subtle grading of intelligence and empathy for the people I meet, which is amusing times or side of times. It's a hard one to know, just ask the person if you're not sure. Try to use a room with electricity sockets in case a device needs to charge. It's just a practical one. We've all been in a scenario where your phone dies. It's much more significant if that's your primary means of communication. In group situations, ask the person permission to read out the responses if their communication aid has no voice output. John says, at committee meetings, I might pass my written point to my neighbour or to the chair to read out, and they can initiate and drive the discussion. So maybe just plan that at the beginning of the session. Allow extra time. Your body language should suggest patience and calm. John says the normal method of conversation involves an extraordinary amount of overlap speech from just 2 or 3 people. This means the speak a unique sentence can find an opening, especially if there's no or can't find an opening, especially if there's no eye contact. Speak Unique is the name of the app that John uses. So yes, calm down, slow down, look at the person trying to communicate, create the illusion that this is a relaxed approach to chatting, that this relaxed approach to chatting is the norm. So hopefully it's not just an illusion, that actually we are kind of calm, giving someone time. Don't ask another question or change topic while the person is still responding. John said it's a commonplace mistake to ask 2 or 3 questions at once. This will not work for this method of communication. It works better if the speech loss person initiates a new conversation that focuses attention on their contributions. And maybe that person might have a relative or a friend or someone with them who kind of interjects and adds a few bits verbally. And if they do, make sure that you're still directing your responses back to the person using the communication aid. So John says it's easy to assume hearing difficulties and even more seriously thinking difficulties where they don't exist. Back to Jo, who says in a social situation that she would sit down, people would come to her like she's a grande dame, but it has to be one-to-one so she can type and they can chat. After half a dozen or so, I'm shattered. Putting everything you think, feel, or need to say through the typed word is tough. So person is attending to the device, they're attending to the conversation. And if we think about if you're texting something and a person's talking, sometimes they say, oh, hang on a minute and I'll just send this. If a person is doing that all the time in the conversation, it is more tiring. I'll just briefly go through these because we've been chatting away, okay. Just to think of the time it takes somebody as well. Speech rate, it varies a little bit, but generally we say in conversation, people say about 150 words per minute. That can go up or down depending on the scenario. When somebody is typing, if you're typing with one finger, you get 11 words per minute, or with several fingers, 15. And looking at somebody who has a physical disability, that can go all the way down to just 5 words per minute. So it's at least 10 times slower for that person. So about 10 to 15 would be counted as a norm. People familiar with communication devices might think, well, these are quite old studies, but there's a word prediction on that. And it's kind of a bit hit and miss if that actually speeds things up, because it might mean that you can get your message in less strokes, keystrokes, but you have to then scan across and attend to other points of the screen as well. If a person is using AAC, they have to kind of consider, well, and I'm sure for you too, John, if you are MK, if you are thinking if it's a bit more effortful for your speech when you're tired, should I bother to take a turn? How much should I say? How much time do I have? What's the prior history with the listener? So I have given me time and they're a good listener, and how important is my message? And if someone is rushed, they might just give a word or two or actually just disengage. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, depending on the temperature of the room or the group, you may tend to disengage if you feel there's been too much spoken about this particular point already, and what I have to say may have a minor difference, but it's not worth my effort.
Okay. And John says there is an enormous pool of goodwill out there, and one of the things I've learned is that when you get to say less, you are inclined to think more before you speak, which is probably a benefit for all. So this is our final slide. Just some suggestions of things we've been talking about in focus groups. Have maybe smaller subgroups, allow breaks, limit the duration. If you're doing a one-to-one with someone, maybe it's an interview scenario with a person with speech difficulty or loss, you might just need to chunk that into shorter sessions so that they know that they're not rushed, or you can come back another day to follow up. Provide more time for someone to respond if they can use typing or writing, such as email, WhatsApp, even post. I saw a Twitter post over the weekend from Next Steps SLT in Cork, who work in neurodiversity, and they refer to this as asynchronous communication, and it's actually a very good way for people with autism as well, that they have more time to process the message, consider their reply. And they also suggested maybe things like boards, something like a Facebook group where people can have a conversation by text. Offer tasks the person can do, review documents, edit, compose in their own time so they can manage around fatigue. Consider format, structure, information. As MK was saying, if you don't ask the right question, you're not going to get the right answer. And if it's more effort for someone to give you the answer, we need to be making sure that we're asking the right questions. And John says, lastly, it might be worth reminding the researchers that suggesting to a person in my position, so that's somebody who has muscle difficulty impacting on their speech muscles, and they're also the ones we use for eating and drinking and swallowing. It might, if they suggest have a chat over coffee or lunch, it can be a major problem as eating and drinking are difficult, messy, or impossible, and particularly if also trying to interject a comment. So, MK, last word.
If somebody is organising anything with people that have, shall we say, non-normal speech or physical attributes, it would be very relevant to make a full recce assessment of the location, the facilities provided, and non-obvious obstacles. I was in Athlone at the weekend, and I asked one of the hotel staff where the toilets were. He directed me. I got to the door, and I took everything I had in me to actually get the door open. I had a rollator, so my difficulty was getting back out. It took longer to get out of the toilet because I was on my own, and it was a spring-loaded door to a toilet. In the hotel last night, when we arrived, by the way, this is my son, Adam, and if Adam hadn't been with me, I would have never got to my room, because the key fob for the corridor opening was on the wall over there, and the door, which again was spring-loaded heavily for fire safety. How was I going to get out in the case of a fire? Timing wouldn't have allowed me pop the key and get to the door to open it. Building design.
It's a good consideration. We're having our inaugural M&D PPI panel meeting next month, and we're saying if anybody wants to bring something, then they're welcome to come and sit in. So for issues like that.
Not available.
You were saying though that you think if we are inviting you to a building, to a room, that we should do the recce, and we should send you out that so each person doesn't have to do that themselves. So to think about those things like car parking, lifts, accessible toilets, the doors. Yeah, okay. And maybe...
To me, they're obvious, but...
Yeah, they're obvious to you because you've lived that experience.
Yes.
Where for people who haven't, they might not think of those things, or even to have people along the route from the door to the room to open fire doors and things like that maybe. Yeah, okay. That's us.
Okay, so